Australian landscapes have been modified by humans for thousands of years, but it's the most recent 200 that have seen dramatic change. While many bird species can survive in increasingly fragmented patches of native vegetation, isolation brings with it insidious long-term threats. For specialist feeders relying on particular trees for food, fragmentation increases the damaging effects of processes such as fire and drought, and over time, this critical food source then slowly disappears. For one bird in particular, a cross-country band of people have sought to rectify this through powerful citizen science and education. This is the story of the Glossy Black Cockatoo.
I'm Dr. Daniela Texera. I'm a Glossy Black-cockatoo researcher based in Queensland, and today I'm here in the beautiful Nusa National Park looking for Glossy Black-cockatoos. So Glossy Black-cockatoos are the smallest black cockatoo that we have. They're around 46 to 52 centimetres, and that's about 10 centimetres smaller than other black cockatoos. It's important to be able to identify them from other similar sized black birds like crows. Sometimes people get those confused. So Glossy black cockatoos are sexually dimorphic, which means that the males and the females look different from each other. The males are a brownish black colour all over, and they have these striking red tail feathers. The females are similar, but across the head they have yellow feathers that's a bit patchy and haphazard. And those patches are actually individually unique, just like our fingerprints, for instance. And the females have red in their tails as well, sometimes a bit of orange and yellow, but they have these black stripes through the tail. So that's how you can tell the females apart from the males. Glossy black cockatoos are socially monogamous, and what this means is that males and females pair up for life. So they actually will stay together for decades, raising young, travelling across the landscapes together. And in this sense, they're a little bit different to some of the other birds in Australia, which might have many different mates throughout the course of their life. Glossy black cockatoos need big hollow-bearing trees for nesting, and those hollows have to be fairly high up in the tree, and it has to be big enough to fit a nestling as well as the female. The female is the only parent bird that actually goes inside the hollow, so the female is dependent on the male to feed her, and the female then feeds the nestling. Another cool thing about glossies is that they mostly feed with their left foot, and in science we call this lateralized behaviour, and we tend to see that in really highly intelligent animals. Cockatoos are some of the most intelligent animals in the world. When you think of how animals learn, cockatoos are some of the very few animals in the whole animal kingdom who can actually learn new things throughout life. And a good example of this is their ability to learn new vocalizations. So cockatoos have what we call open-ended vocal learning, which means that throughout the whole course of their life, they can acquire and learn new vocalizations. A lot of other birds, although they have beautiful complex songs, they only have a very narrow window in early life during which they can actually learn those songs. But cockatoos, being so intelligent and so advanced in that sense, actually have this remarkable ability to pick up other vocalizations. And this is true only for a few other animals in the animal kingdom, such as whales and dolphins. There's 3 recognised subspecies of glossy black cockatoo, and here in Queensland we have 2 of those. So there's the northern subspecies, which goes about as far north as Townsville roughly, and that comes down to sort of central Queensland, perhaps around Bundaberg or Hervey Bay. The southeastern subspecies is found here in southeast Queensland where we are today, and that subspecies stretches all the way down the coast into northeast Victoria. Glossy black cockatoos are she-oak specialists, that's all they eat, but depending where we are in the country, that will change the actual species of she-oak that they're feeding on. Here in southeast Queensland, close to the coast, we'll find glossy black cockatoos feeding on coastal she-oak and black she-oak. Further inland we go and higher altitudes, we'll start to see them feed on forest she-oak, and then further west again, they'll start to feed on bala and bull oak as well. Throughout evolutionary history, this has probably served them very well. She-oak is fairly abundant in some parts of Australia, and they would have had an abundant food source for literally millennia. Glossy black cockatoos are highly specialised in their diet, right down to the individual tree. So even if you're in a patch of forest where you see lots and lots of she-oak trees, there might only be a handful of those that the glossy black cockatoos feed on, and that might actually change year after year. And from the research that we've done so far, we know that that's dictated by profitability or return on investment, so to speak. Things like nutrition, such as mineral content and protein content, can be really important to the individual trees that glossies choose to feed on. Other things like tree size, canopy size is probably also really important. This dietary specialization is one of the reasons why it is so important that we protect Glossy Black-cockatoo's feeding habitat and why we need to plant feeding habitat. These are the things that are really going to bolster the populations, particularly in areas where we've had a lot of land clearing historically. Glossy Black-cockatoos are a listed threatened species in Queensland. Under the Nature Conservation Act, they're actually listed as vulnerable. And of course, there's a reason for this listing. Glossy Black-cockatoos have suffered a multitude of threats. A lot of this is really about land clearing and historical habitat loss, but also habitat fragmentation. And in this day and age, what we're really concerned about is the impacts of climate change, drought and fire. Those are the real big ticket items that scientists like myself are increasingly worried about. When thinking of the things that threaten Glossy Black-cockatoos, we really need to think not in isolation, but how do these threats work synergistically? The whole is worth more than the sum of the parts. If we take fire as an example, Glossy Black-cockatoos have evolved in these she oak forests, which are generally fairly tolerant of fire, but there can't be too much fire, and the fire can't be too severe, especially when we've got historical habitat loss, plus drought. We know things like drought actually decrease the quality of the food trees, so when you combine that with fire and a small amount of remaining habitat, these things can be absolutely disastrous for their conservation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Guy Castley from Griffith University. I've been working with Glossy Black-cockatoos probably for about 12 years now as a researcher. The Glossy Black Conservancy was established in 2005, and it's a loose association of really passionate people that are committed to conserving the Glossy Black-cockatoo in southeast Queensland and northeastern New South Wales. The Conservancy is an association of local council members, research academics, state government officials that work in conservation of biodiversity, as well as community groups. What the Conservancy has been hoping to achieve over the time frame since it was established is to find out more about the ecology of the Glossy Black-cockatoo. So this relates to the distribution across the landscape and how it uses the habitats that it relies on. So the Glossy Black-cockatoo is a really specialist species. It relies on a unique set of feeding resources, but it also requires hollow-bearing trees for nesting. So part of the requirements that the Conservancy was looking at is to better understand where these features within the landscape can be found. And to achieve this, what the Conservancy has done is to try and create awareness within the community to allow members from the public to come and report information about where the species is observed, where they've seen the species feeding, and what they can do in those places to try and preserve the species. Some of those actions, for example, include participating in birding days, recording sightings of Glossy Black-cockatoos in different habitats, but also recording where the birds have been feeding and evidence of that feeding activity. So underneath the feed tree, where the Glossy Black-cockatoos have been chewing through the cones, we see evidence of their exploits. And this is basically where they process the cones with their left foot. They'll grind through the cone, picking out the seeds as they go, and these fragments of cone are then dropping to the ground and forming these huge carpets underneath these feed trees. So you might be wondering what the Glossy Black Conservancy does with all the information that we get from our citizen scientists. So with the reports of the birds as well as the feed trees, the Glossy Black Conservancy has used this information to essentially map the habitats that are critical for the species. By knowing where we've seen the birds and where their important feed trees are, we can map out those key habitats that are critical for their survival. Once we've mapped out these habitats, we can pass on those physical maps to local councils and to planning agencies that they can then incorporate into their planning approval processes. If you'd like to find out more about the Glossy Black Conservancy, you can follow them on their webpage, that's glossyblack.org.au. And there's a Facebook page that you can follow and a number of Instagram feeds that also showcase the work that the Glossy Black Conservancy is doing. People can also get involved by actually planting trees. Because we know that the Glossy Black-cockatoo is a highly specialised feeder, we can go out and get free trees, for example, from your local councils, and you can take those she oak trees and plant them in your garden.
I am Samantha Morris. I am the coordinator for this year's Glossy Black-cockatoo Birding Day, and we're with a bunch of volunteers who are about to head into the field to see if they can spot Glossy Black-cockatoos or any of their feed trees. So today we have 350 volunteers heading out in the field across northeast New South Wales and southeast Queensland. We have volunteers as far north as Mackay and as far south as Victoria. They've all contributed their time this weekend to collect data about glossy black cockatoos, which are a very rare cockatoo in Australia. And we then work with these volunteers to collate this data, analyse it, and then use the data to make better decisions about the glossy black cockatoo so that we can ensure it's here for many generations to come. Citizen science is when general members of the public without any specific skill sets get together and work collaboratively with scientists, academics, researchers towards a specific science or research goal. With the Glossy Black Birding Day, it's about observing glossy black cockatoos in the field, learning about their behaviours and any change to their behaviours as a result of bushfires or other threats, collecting this data, and then using science and research teams to analyse that data. So there's a bunch of ways people can get involved in not just helping protect glossy black cockatoos, but any of Australia's special plants and animals. Firstly, events like this one, the Glossy Black Cockatoo Birding Day, really do welcome anyone of any skill level. We go through a process of training people so they know what to look for when it comes to identifying the bird and their feed trees. Another thing that people can do is to keep pressure on decision makers so that we use data like what we collect from our birding day to inform decision making so that those decisions are actually in the best interests of all species, not just humans.
Hi, I'm Spencer and I'm 10 years old and I'm standing here underneath some of the glossy feed trees in Sunshine Beach State High School, and I came here with my mummy to photograph the glossies. I've been doing this for about 3 years now, coming here and photographing them and seeing the birds, observing them and counting them. And recently we've just had 35 glossies, so that's why it's really important to save this habitat.
Nusa Flexi is a school under Edmund Rice Education Australia. It's a special assistance school, and we're here to educate young people who are often marginalised or disenfranchised and disengaged from mainstream models of education. The young people who walk through our gate often have some really complex social barriers, and we aim to give them a space where they can engage and be themselves and connect with education and community. We're also very privileged here to be graced by the beautiful glossy black cockatoos. They come and hang out with us most days here. We get to see them, and they form a really strong part of our identity as a school and how we see ourselves in the community. So our school logo, which was designed by a young person, is sort of based around the theme of the glossy black cockatoos. There's that really lovely connection around vulnerability. The cockatoo's quite vulnerable, and many of our young people are vulnerable in their situations at times, so it kind of gives us a spiritual linkage to them in some ways. We feel really fortunate to have them around, so we really try hard to raise awareness with young people and the community about what we can do to support their continued growth in this region.
I'm lucky enough to have been working with glossy black cockatoos for about 5 years now, and I've had some remarkable experiences with them out in the field. I've also seen some devastating scenes as Kangaroo Island burnt, as even southeast Queensland burnt. I've had to go back into those areas and really look at the damage and think about the future of these birds. Will they still be around in another 50 years? Today, we really need to act to save them. I have a lot of hope for glossy black cockatoos because with good science and good resources and intelligent decision making, we know what to do. If we just continue to do the same things whilst considering what the future world is going to look like under climate change and how bushfires are going to become more severe in the future, there's really so much that we can do today to ensure that glossy black cockatoos have a future.